Hi, I'm Louisa Smith, the buying director for Book Passage, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to our event for Sarah Sentilles and her incredible memoir, Stranger Care. The moving story of what one woman learned from fostering a newborn, about injustice, about mistakes, and about how to better love and protect people beyond our immediate kin. Cheryl Strayed said, Stranger Care is a beautiful, harrowing, profound memoir. It means to love and to mother, to belong and let go. In prose so riveting, I found myself holding my breath as I read. Sarah Sentilles writes about fostering and attempting to adopt a baby through foster care system. With profound sensitivity and insight, Sentilles takes readers with her on a tender and wrenching path to motherhood, while grappling with the complexities, contradictions, and injustices of a system meant to protect the most. I love this book so much it hurts. It's a powerful, heartbreaking, necessary masterpiece. Well, we couldn't agree more. I was going to read a shorter piece, but I loved everything that Cheryl had to say about the book, and so had to read the whole quote. Sarah is also the author of Draw Your Weapons, Breaking Up with God, A Church of Her Own, and Taught by America. In conversation with Sarah tonight is someone who knows firsthand what it takes to write a moving and memorable story, Anthony Doerr. Anthony is the author of The Shell Collector, About Grace, Memory Wall, Four Seasons in Rome, and All the Light We Cannot See. And you can look forward to his new novel, Cloud Cuckoo Land, coming in September 2021. And I can tell you, it's absolutely brilliant. Doerr's fiction has won awards that include the Pulitzer Prize, the Carnegie Medal, and 5 O. Henry Prizes. Before we begin, though, I want to thank everyone who is watching for joining us today. We know you have many choices of events, both virtual and in person these days, so we really thank you for spending your time with us for another special author event. If at any time you have questions for Sarah or Anthony, please go ahead and enter them in the chat. We will also be posting a link for Stranger Care in the chat for anyone interested in learning more about the book or supporting Book Passage by making a purchase. We have a limited number of signed book plates for anyone making a purchase of Stranger Care, so make sure you get your order in quickly. And with no further ado, I'd love to turn things over to our two wonderful guests. Welcome to you both. We're absolutely thrilled that you could be here today.
Thanks so much, Louisa. So kind. And thanks to everybody out there for supporting Book Passage, supporting Sarah, and supporting independent bookstores. They are citadels in our communities. Thanks so much for supporting them through this terrible pandemic that hopefully very slight gradient we feel like is beginning to loosen its grip. Sarah, what's up? Congratulations on this book. It's so nice to see you again. We're only maybe 150 miles apart here in Idaho.
Yes, it's crazy to be in a virtual San Francisco event with both of us in Idaho, but I'm so grateful for your time. Thank you for being with me tonight, Tony. I love talking with you.
Of course. Thanks for all your beautiful writing, and especially for this book, which I am plowing through. I just find so much to admire and to learn here, especially as somebody who is so ignorant about the foster care system. So yet another of my 1,000 ignorances that you're helping me to rectify. I want to ask you so much of writing stuff, like the structure, the fascinating structure of this book. But before we get to that, I thought it might be useful for folks who know very little about the book. Just tell us a little bit about your journey to getting Coco, and maybe a little bit about your journey as far as you would like to go along your journey with Coco too.
Sure. Thank you. And I'm excited to answer craft questions. That sounds fun. So I wrote Stranger Care as a love letter to our foster daughter, Coco. I wanted to mother her when I thought I might not be able to mother her anymore. And we ended up, my partner, Eric, and I ended up trying to adopt an infant through the foster care system here in Idaho. I had wanted to be a mother for a long time, but I hadn't been admitting that to myself or to my husband. Even though I think of myself as a feminist, I really wasn't saying what I wanted or what I was longing for. And by the time I did admit that I wanted to be a mother, I realized I was married to someone who didn't want to bring another human on the planet. He thought, well, there are already so many children in the world who need homes. There's 500,000 foster children in foster care on any given day in the United States. Why would we make a new child when there's already all these children that need homes? And also making other humans is bad for the planet. So he didn't quite see the point of that. So, he wants to live in a world where we tend the earth. And I realize I want to live in a world where we tend one another and we tend strangers. So foster care became our kind of common ground. And we started trying to become foster parents in Oregon and went through a very, very involved process there. And then we moved to Idaho and had to start all over again, which was okay with me because I wasn't great in the Oregon system. It kind of activated all my good girl performance self because I thought the social workers could decide if I could become a parent or not. And that made me act weird when they were asking questions about like our sex lives and our history with drugs and alcohol and our discipline strategies. So we ended up becoming—
dramatize that beautifully, like when you describe, even in Idaho, when you describe like, I wanted cookies there when they show up, and I've got the kettle on, for case they want tea, and these heartbreaking moments when you get Coco's room perfect and line up the diapers and everything's clean, and then they don't even go look in her bedroom when they show up.
No, they have a very limited thing. They're looking for carbon monoxide detectors and fire extinguishers, and that your guns are locked away, and that's about it. Right. We didn't have any guns, but we did have the fire detectors and the carbon monoxide detectors. But I mean, it raises an interesting question. How do you tell if someone's going to be a good parent? What do you look for?
Exactly. And you asked that beautifully. It's like, what are you looking for? Is it somebody who looks and thinks like you? And, there's so much to unpack and all of that, of course. Tell us a little bit about the differences between Idaho's foster care and what reunification means. Idaho, you write, is considered a reunification state, which is something I never even understood before. Can you explain some of that?
Yeah, sure. So the title of the book, Stranger Care, comes because that's what Eric and I were called in the foster care system. We were non-relative care providers, or stranger care, which is such an alienating term for this very intimate task, but it kind of points to how the whole system works. So when you become a foster parent, you're asked to extend your heart to children that are not biologically linked to you, and to children that will be in your home for maybe one night, maybe years, maybe forever. You don't know. So you're really, part of the beauty of it is this real expansive sense of family and what counts as kin. But the foster care system itself really prioritizes biology. The goal of the system is to reunify or reunite children with their biological families, sometimes for very, very good reasons. The foster care system has a really bad history and an ongoing practice now of separating families that shouldn't be separated. I mean, you can think of what happens at the border is similar to what's happening in foster care to families in the United States, and it's exacerbated by poverty and by racism. But in Idaho is a reunification state, which means 72% of the time they reunify children with their biological families. The national average is more around 50% of the time. And part of the trouble is that once reunification happens, all the supports that a family might have had while they were in foster care, like childcare that's provided by foster parents, access to rehab, drug counselors, mental health counselors, help finding jobs, help finding housing. Once the reunification happens, all of those supports disappear. So the goal is reunification, which should really be the starting point, not the end point. But in Idaho, where we find ourselves, it's the end, and families are left on their own, which means children are left on their own.
Absolutely. They're so, the ethics here are so complicated. And by the time you get to about page 300, you think, it's just so complicated. First, when I started, I'm like, Sarah should feel good about herself this whole time. Like she's doing something wonderful. But you write this is just a beautiful passage on 236. I'd imagine foster care as somehow ethically cleaner than private adoptions or fertility treatments. But it became more complicated, and I became more complicit by the day. Children taken from parents who want them. Children taken from parents who struggle with addiction. Children taken from parents who are poor. Children taken from parents who abuse them because their parents abused them, and their parents, and their parents, and on and on and on. There is no innocent space, my professor would say when I was in graduate school, nowhere to stand but right here. How did your feelings about what the right thing to do during this whole process change, and how have they evolved since?
That's such a beautiful question. Thank you for asking me that. It makes me feel a little bit emotional to think about it, because that was one of the things that shifted for me, is that understanding of my own complicity in these systems. Part of the power of becoming a foster parent is recognizing that all of these children belong to us, and that the reason that they're in foster care also belongs to us. It's the failure of all of our systems.
Right.
We don't have a pro-family system. We don't have a living wage. We have racism. We have structural poverty. We don't have good treatment for addiction. So, by the time you end up in foster care, everything else has failed. It's like this last place that reveals so much brokenness, and all of that belongs to us as well. So here I was, I wanted. We picked up Coco from the hospital when she was 3 days old. She lived with us for 10 months. We woke up in the night with her. We fed her. We introduced her to the natural world. It's not babysitting, it's parenting. And I wanted, more than I'd ever wanted anything, to keep her. But her biological mother wanted to keep her too. And her biological mother wanted to get her life put back together so that she could keep her. And I remember the first day that I met Evelyn, we had Coco when she was 3 days old, and then 2 weeks later we had the first court date. And so here is this mother who's given birth 2 weeks before. She still has all the signs of someone who's just given birth. And the first time she meets the strangers who are going to take care of her child is at a courtroom after passing through metal detectors. And she asked to hold her baby, and Coco was less than 5 pounds, and she held her and just held her to her chest and whispered, "I love you, I 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 love you." And that was my first sign, like, this is not what I thought it was. And so part of the journey of the book is holding both. I want to keep Coco. I think she would have the healthiest, most vibrant life with us. And I have to root for her biological mother, who is trying to change her life to get this daughter back who she loves. And I had to somehow hold both of those at once.
Yeah, you render that just beautifully in the book, Sarah. And you've made me self-conscious about the word vulnerable, because I think, you get to the root of it, which means having pain caused to you and also causing pain.
Mm-hmm.
But at least my old understanding, my understanding of the word vulnerable a few days before, I feel like you take this brave stance. I would have been so tempted to conceal the part of me that wanted to keep Coco and
Mm-hmm.
say, like, oh, all along I was trying to work to get the baby back to the biological mother. And you do this beautiful thing in the book, which is so hard to do, which is you dramatize for the reader this feeling of just this dialectic, this tearing at your emotions of, I also want this baby. Like, I'm bonding with this baby. You take her outside in the snow and show her the sky. And so can you talk a little bit about the decisions you made while writing to even say, I'm going to share this story publicly is a big risk, I think, an emotional risk.
Yeah, I've never had that feeling before where I was rooting against another human being. I think of myself as a real ethical person. I wanted to be an Episcopal priest. I went to divinity school, and before Coco came into my life, I was out in the world talking about the philosopher Emmanuel Levinas, who, dedicated his life to coming up with an ethical system that would make another genocide impossible. And he always talked about this idea of being confronted with the stranger or the other, and that the parts of the other that scared you were actually God, were the divine, and that they had to be protected at all costs, even at the cost of losing your own life. And I had been giving, talks about this idea. That was easy for me to do in the abstract, but then here comes Evelyn. Here's this stranger who I wanted her to disappear. I wanted something bad to happen to her because I wanted to keep her daughter, because I thought her daughter would be safer with me. That's a part of my humanity that I hadn't been in touch with before. And it took, a very brave therapist who I write about, who said, this isn't who we want to be. We don't want to root against another human being so that we can get what we want. This child could save her life, and you don't need your life saved. And she also said, your life, meaning mine, isn't more important than Evelyn's.
Yeah.
And so I had to show those parts of myself so it could also show the practice of turning that around and engaging in a practice where I recognized that I had to love Evelyn as much as I loved Coco. And that if I couldn't, then it would be a big failing on my part.
Yeah, that's just beautiful and so sad. And you have to be kinder to yourself. Like, that's so difficult to do. I mean, baby, that's just time. You're with a baby, they're so vulnerable. And Evelyn, you're only seeing at these scheduled meetings for 90 minutes twice a week. And It's just such a complicated thing. I know this is an impossible question, but how do we redesign the system? Let me just get to some of the racism and misogyny built into it too. You wrote, if you're Black or brown, your children are more likely to be taken from you than if you're white, and they're also more likely not to be returned to you. It feels like, before I read the book, I thought, well, foster parents are saints. They're doing something necessary. But then you read this and you're like, it's so complex. Like how, and in a country with the geographical range that we have and the political range, 300 plus million human beings, how would you redesign the system? And I know it's a ridiculous question, but having learned things, do you have some practical ways to try to make the system more humanizing to everybody involved?
Well, I'm not a policy person, so I'm sure there's lots of people who could answer that better, but I do know what I experienced in this system, which is super complicated. I mean, the easiest answer is, you want to fix foster care, fix poverty, fix racism, fix misogyny, have pro-family policies that support working parents, that support a livable wage, that support good, safe housing, that give access to rehab. I mean, all of those, that we would barely have any kids in foster care if we fix those things. But the two key things, I think, are also this idea that the supports end when the child is reunified. That seems completely backwards to me. It seems like the supports should begin. I mean, part of what the foster care system is trying to do is protect parents' constitutional rights. So once the child is returned, the state doesn't really have access to that family anymore. So that's part of why the system breaks apart. But Eric and I have recently adopted an infant through a nonprofit agency in Boise called A New Beginning, which is an amazing agency. And I think open adoption offers some real resources for what it might look like after reunification, because our son knows his birth mother, will always know his birth mother's family. They have become part of our family, and we've become part of their family. So it's that expansive sense of family that a foster parent is asked to have continues. It's not, after Coco was reunified, we couldn't come to court, we couldn't have access to her. We were seen as interlopers. We were just shut out of the whole thing. The other thing I think is more people need to become foster parents. If you've ever had the tiny thought, I should be a foster parent, I could be a foster parent, do it. The more eyes on this system, the more people recognizing that all these children deserve love, that they did nothing to end up where they are, and that they need us. I think that is really the key to remembering that these are all these children, they're not ours, but they belong to us. And you can do anything. You could be a court-appointed special advocate. You can be a mentor. You can be a foster parent. You can offer respite care. There's all different ways to get involved. And it's the most profound experience I've ever had in my life.
That's beautiful, Sarah. Yeah, you've touched on so many things there. This idea of alternative kinship structures is so beautiful. And I think that's another really important way to kind of defamiliarize us from, at least those of us who grew up in a heterosexual, heterogeneous family. And so you just have a couple lines in here. Sometimes biology does not guarantee care of well-being or protection. Sometimes the love of one stranger for another is what keeps us safe. And for me, that really touches on so much of all of your work, and the work of literature itself really is like the idea of literature is, Tolstoy said, art should cause violence to be set aside.
Wow.
The idea that we should learn through our imaginations that the other is us. And so that you don't, that's even what your title says so beautifully, is that we are the stranger. And how can we reimagine families to be more inclusive and to understand that reunification isn't always the best thing. And maybe, having these larger groups. Which brings me to your structure. The occasionally you'll bring in just little notes, like let's say it's an A-B structure, although occasionally you break that pattern beautifully. But for those who don't know the book yet, there's Sarah's journey to getting Coco from moving from Oregon and moving through the foster system. And those are these beautiful titled vignettes. And then pretty much every other page, you'll get a little, almost like a little prose poem of something Sarah is either obliquely suggesting is relevant to this moment, or is directly relevant, and it's fun to have your imagination try to figure out how each one is, whether it's the, the Harlow's monkey experiments or something about how birds take care of their young. And occasionally you'll bring up other cultures' attitudes towards families too. So I thought we'd start there. I don't want to ask you to dive deep into your memory, but in the book, do you remember some of the examples of other cultures who have different understandings of family and who gets assigned to a child when they're born?
That's great. And, I was thinking when you were talking about how I was doing it, I heard you give a lecture on similes. I think it was similes, metaphor in Sun Valley. And when I was preparing for tonight, I was thinking like, I was trying to do in this book kind of what you were talking about, what a metaphor or a simile can do in a sentence, which is put things side by side that we're trained to think of as separate. And so that was, I wanted to do that. I like to make argument by placement, argument by juxtaposition, kind of argument by simile in the way that you so brilliantly talked about in that lecture. But I also knew that this was going to be a really intimate and painful story. And so in the beginning, I think I was looking to the natural world for evidence of stranger care, evidence of kinship as a practice, of caretaking that happens in the natural world. And then by the end, a friend of mine pointed out that I didn't realize by the end, nature was taking care of me. I was finding solace in this beautiful place where we live. But one of the things that stayed with me about kinship as a practice was some communities that if you eat the food grown from the same land, then you are family. That idea that they bury the ancestors in the land. And so the ancestor's body becomes part of the earth, and which then grows the yam that then you consume. And so everyone who eats that same food source is considered family. Or people who survive shipwreck are considered family. I just think that, if we think about what partnership is or what marriage, that's stranger care. We're not biologically related to the people that we make family with, but somehow we get these very narrow understandings of who belongs to us and who we're called to care for. And so I was trying to look for these alternatives, interspecies relationships where animals are taking care of other animals' young, or just seeing animals as family. Like we like to watch robins just fledged in my backyard yesterday. And I'm watching the dad of the robins teach his children how to fly. When I see a bird, I don't think, oh, that's someone's son, that's someone's daughter, that's a parent. And so why is it that we only apply family structure to a very narrow segment of the human population when it's everywhere? Kinship is everywhere.
Absolutely. I mean, that's just the most important lesson of our time. If the pandemic was caused by a spillover virus, and certainly if it wasn't, we'll have more that are. The more we infringe on natural habitats, the more viruses will spill into our population. And it's yet one of a million reminders that to think of the human world and the natural world as separate is totally artificial. And we have to training our imaginations, just the science being done on our intestines right now, like microbiology in there. We have whole wildernesses inside of us. To think of us as like, I'm just a human moving through the world, I'm by myself, is totally absurd. We're like this huge cooperative of organisms that's working together to make energy. And so I think, the idea that foster care is yet another iteration of that is so pretty. And so you're not just making meaning or argument by juxtaposition. I think you're also making beauty sometimes in language by doing that. I think so the book is, as it's emotional, but there's also an aesthetic pleasure in reading it too, which is really interesting to me.
Thank you.
Of course. I wanted to talk a little bit about when did you commit to that structure? And are you hearing from readers that love it? And are there some maybe more traditional readers that are like, I'm skipping those sections to find out
Mostly I'm hearing from readers who love it. Occasionally though, you get the 2-star review that's like, I do not like, I don't like, memoirs that work like this. But mostly what I found, people have thanked me. I think it feels like that beauty feels like a respite, that the story is sad, but that they feel like it ends, they feel hopeful at the end. They feel like they've seen the world anew, they've seen parenting anew, they've seen family anew. So I feel like an ethical responsibility as a writer, and I'd be curious how you approach this, but when you're writing about hard material, that the sentence has to lift, you know, it has to feel almost like a song, or that you're offering aesthetic pleasure when you're also having heartache, you know, that those two have to go together. To me, that's an ethical choice as a writer that I try to make.
That's interesting. Yeah, the white space is certainly a gesture of kindness sometimes to the reader, I think, and it's a moment to recover. And I thought it was just interesting for your mind to leave the narrative. There's something beautifully suspenseful almost about, like, okay, what's happening with Sarah and Coco? That plate is spinning out of sight for a page, while I read about how birds deal with kinship for a page. And then there's something like the plate accumulates power when you're looking away from it sometimes. You know, that's how a lot of drama works, I think. So I think you pulled that off beautifully. It made me think of Moby Dick and those random chapters here and there.
Hated those. I hated them.
Did you have models? Because you're saying I hate memoirs that work like this you're seeing in reviews, but I was trying to think of another model, more contemporary model, where the narrative's broken with little informational, almost prose poems.
No, I haven't. I wrote Draw Your Weapons like that. I mean, I wrote it as a collection of fragments. You asked like when I committed to this form. I write in fragments. That's kind of how I write. And I also write, I like to think of myself writing like a magpie, you know, whatever I find myself, whatever shines for me, I'm interested in following that. And a teacher that I studied with, the writer Nick Flynn, was very permission giving for me for that, because he said, you know, whatever you find yourself drawn to, it's connected to your project in some way. And so I've tried to trust that. It means I write, you know, thousands of pages more than ever show up in the book, because you get a lot of stuff that really has nothing to do with your project. But I wanted the story to be intimate, and then to open into the world, and then to be intimate, and then to open into the world. And I liked what you said about white space as breath. I wanted it to be an invitation for the reader to animate the text. And I also wanted the white space to point to the limits of my own understanding. You know, I think it's important to show that there's more to Evelyn than what I can capture on the page. You know, there's more than every social worker than what I capture on the page. And for me, that's also an ethical commitment as a writer to point to my own failures, to my own misseeing, and the transcendence, make room for the transcendence of the other on the page. So that was part of what I wanted the structure to do as well.
Yeah, boy, that's lovely. Nick Flynn, for folks who don't know, is such an interesting guy. He's an amazing poet. And he also, his willingness to just use the anarchic, just anything that's in the world, juxtapose against what you're doing now. And it could be interesting. You're right. There's a kind of permission in that. And I think, yeah, it's inspiring. I'm always trying to think like, how does this determine this? And it better be right. And this owl should represent wisdom here, because that's what people think owls represent. And you know, he's like, just have the owl blow up, like whatever you need to happen.
Yeah. I'm definitely not an anarchic writer. I like it to be, I like to, nothing to be wasted, for every description to do like multiple purposes. But what Nick gave me was the gift of permission, and the gift of understanding writing as a kind of curation, that it's your brain or your creativity or your imagination that's curating a certain version of the world. And I think that's a beautiful way to approach what it means to write.
Great segue, Sarah, and great comment. The push-pull of the emotions that you go through here. I'm curious, I'll just gonna read a sentence. My question is, how did the writing of this book help you process some of those emotions? So the sentence that really broke my heart was, my heart broke for Evelyn. This is after an early hearing. I think Coco is about 3 weeks old, something like that. And after the hearing, you find Evelyn outside crying on the sidewalk. My heart broke for Evelyn. The work ahead must have felt insurmountable, but there was another part of me, a bigger part that lifted. We're gonna get to keep the baby, that part whispered. She's ours. That and these gutting sections early on where you're offered some children who are extremely developmentally disabled and struggling with a number of disabilities, and you weren't sure you would be able to take them on, which is another immense vulnerability to write about. Did the writing help you process some of that?
Yes, you know, I wrote a lot of this in real in real time when it was happening. We would go to a court date that was really hard, or have a difficult social worker, or even before that, take that phone call with a little boy who lived very close to our home that we said no to. And Eric would just look at me and say, go write. And I didn't want to, it felt impossible, but I did. I would just write these raw notes. And so I had all of this material when it was time to figure out what I wanted this to be. What would a love letter to Coco look like? What do I want? What kind of world do I want it to contain? What do I want? How do I want to send her the message, you're home, no matter where you are. That was my goal. You belong here, you're home, wherever you find yourself. But there were three things that helped me in my heartbreak. One was activism in the community. I do a lot of work to support immigrants, to remember, my heartbreak is not the only heartbreak. The second was walking in these trails with my wonderful friends. And one friend in particular walked over and over and over in these trails and was held by the earth and the wildflowers and the sky and the hawks and the river. And then the third was writing. Writing brought Coco close to me when she was far. Writing helped me see what healing might look like, or what transformation might look like. Some things we never heal from, we just transform, become something else. And it also, to put those parts of myself on the page, also felt healing, because the more vulnerable I was, the more readers have said, I saw myself there, even if it's not the same tenderness or the same rawness. And, the child that we said no to, the other thing is he found a much better home. He's with his occupational therapist, his physical therapist. That's his family now. So that's another thing. Like, it's sometimes saying no is the best thing you can do. Sometimes you're not the only one the world is waiting for. Sometimes there's someone better than you. And so that has been a balm as well, because that was such a shattering, to come up against your own limits as a human, and what you're able to do and not do. And it's important to know those.
Yeah. You have a single sentence. It's just the word shame there. And it just got me like, and I never even, and here you are being such a good person to put yourself in the position to even have to make that decision, and then to feel shattered and miserable about yourself. It's such a complicated ethical situation.
It reveals this kind of rift in my relationship with Eric, which is like, he approaches the world that we're saying no all the time. We're always turning from other people's suffering, always, every second of every day. We're not paying attention to someone's suffering. But foster care gives you this very specific event where someone calls your telephone, they say your name, they say the name of a child, and they ask you if you will help. So it's this profound opportunity to say yes. And it's also this very difficult opportunity to say no. But it is what we're doing all the time to one another.
Totally. I think about that in terms of climate change all the time. The calculus of like, this shirt, did it get shipped here with petroleum? And like, how much energy is this Zoom burning? And like, are the lights on so that people can see me better? Is that a bad thing because it's still daylight out? And there is no innocent space to stand in, as your teacher said.
Exactly.
So there's some great questions getting posted. I'm going to ask you a couple. There's one quite related to what we were just talking about writing. How did the writing of this book change how you see being a parent? Did it?
Oh, that's a beautiful, beautiful question. Yes, it changed how I see being a parent. It changed how I see being a mother also. For me, parenting and mothering is a verb. It's something that we practice. And I started to understand that writing this book for Coco was a kind of mothering, and that art making is a kind of mothering. And I started seeing all the ways that I already mother, and all the ways that I've been mothered by my own mother, and by other people who've been important in my life. But the other thing that it really made clear is that I want to be a parent. I want to be a forever parent. I want to be a mother. I want to raise a child. And it was extremely confirming of that.
Great. Okay, another writing question. Did you write it in the same sequence it is in the book? I'm sure you've gotten that before. Or did you rearrange it later for the flow rhythm of the book?
Rearrange. I write a mess. I write so many fragments. I have all these little folders like birds, poems, trees, all these thematic things that I'm interested in, and I collect the fragments, and then I end up kind of coding them, printing them out, and cutting them up and rearranging them, like physically doing that, which is something else I also learned how to do from Nick. This book, Draw Your Weapons, took Stranger Care came out much more quickly and is more plot driven. It has like a real momentum that carries through. So that structure was clear to me, how I wanted this story arc to move, but the more interstitial chapters were harder. And my editor at Random House, Andy Ward, gives me this assignment, which is when I have a draft that's finished, which is for every chapter, and each chapter has, the plot driven parts and then these interstitial sections. I have to be able to say in one sentence what it's about, which is brutal and very revealing. So that's how I figure out what belongs where.
And did you feel some pressure because I certainly can feel the pace picking up quickly when you get Coco. Did you feel pressure from him or from the publisher to tell the story in a more traditional, no interruptions, no interstitial way?
Not at all. Andy totally gets me and supports me to write the book I want to write. No, I did not. The only discussion we had was whether or not to include the epilogue. So the epilogue shares what happened after reunification. And there was real big questions about whether that should go in or not. And it's interesting because my working title for the book was The Moon Book. And I never knew why, but I knew it had something to do with the moon, even though I didn't do any real writing about the moon. And it was only in the epilogue where I wrote about something called giant impact theory, this theory of how they think the moon was formed, that I understood what the whole book was about. So that's one of those things like magpie shiny, like the moon was drawing me, but it wasn't clear until the very end. And we did decide to put the epilogue in, but we had a lot of conversations about that.
That's beautiful. That's interesting. That ties with the question early on, and the question's such an amazing personal story. Was it hard to determine what to write about and what to keep private?
Yes and no. The first draft that I shared with my editor, my agent, who is named Molly Friedrich, who's brilliant. She's like the best reader on the planet. She called me, she's very direct, and she said, "You and Eric are so smart. If you wanted to adopt, why the fuck did you foster?" That's what she said. And what I realized is I had left out the whole story of my marriage, and what I said in the beginning, how Eric didn't want to make another human and I did, and how we were going to navigate what that meant to grow our family. And that was something I'd wanted to keep private. So I ended up I think this is an important thing for writers to know, is that you have to write your truth all the way. Even the parts that feel most exposing, you at least have to write that for yourself. Then you can pull back and shape it in a way that feels comfortable to share in public. But I was writing around this kind of central question, and I had to write straight through it. And then I could present it in a way that I felt comfortable with. But everything else felt okay. It's only when people are like, "Wow, you're so brave to show that part of yourself on the page," then I feel like, a little bit nervous about it.
Yeah, but you're right. There's something so empowering about humbling yourself. It's a strange paradox, but the more you admit your humanity, a person admits his or her humanity, the more we feel empowered. And I think other people are inspired by that. And for some reason, it takes us decades to figure that out.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, that they don't want your performed self. They want the heart, the beating heart, and all its complicated messiness.
Yeah, and that's the real work, I think, of writing. It's there's so much different kinds of work in writing, but it is really scary sometimes. Do you hope Coco reads the book when she grows up? And what do you hope she gets from your book?
Yes, I hope that she reads it. I hope that she knows we fought for her and that we fight for her every day, and that we're here to be her champion in whatever way that looks, however we're allowed to champion her in her life. And my hope for her, a part of the kinship story of this book is that, if we're all made of the same material, if we all come from the stars, then we all belong to one another, and we're all home already wherever we find ourselves. And so that was what I wanted her to know, is that wherever she finds herself, she's never far from home, and that she belongs. That I hope she feels, in the same way that Evelyn was whispering to her, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. I hope that this story whispers to her, I love you, I love you, I love you. You are loved, you are loved, you are loved, you are loved. That's my hope for her. And I actually say before the epilogue, I hope someday I'll get to tell you this in person. So that would be something that I would love for her to read this.
Yeah, that's so beautiful, Sarah. It's amazing. Totally different strain, but I want to make sure I get all these in. Are there other nonfiction writers who inspire you?
Yes. Whenever I get that question, like everyone that I read goes flying out of my head. I love so many nonfiction writers, and now all of them have gone out of my head.
That's okay. How about, let's see, Cheryl Strayed blurbed the book. Did you read Wild?
Of course I read Wild. I love Wild. I love Leslie Jameson. She wrote this essay that I've been talking about a lot that I'm obsessed with called Baggage Claims. That's part of her most recent book, and she has a new book coming out. I read a lot of novels. I read indiscriminately. I don't normally read just nonfiction. I love Nick Flynn. I have my books of all my top books are in the other room. I should probably go look for them, but they'll all come flooding back, and I can send them to Book Passage, and they can send it in their email.
Oh my gosh, I do that all the time. And then tonight you'll be in bed and you'll be like, oh my God.
Holy shit. I'm a horrible writer. I should have prepared that.
No. There's something that's just so, this book as a more traditional parent is helping me think about parenting in my own life too. And there was a line, you were in Jerome, Idaho in this workshop, and there's some social workers leading you through this before you've been assigned a child. Getting certified, is that the right verb?
Yeah, licensed, certified, yeah.
Yeah. And she says, you can say things to the child in your care like, quote, I know you don't want to be here. I know you miss your mom, but you're here and we're in this together, Dawn said. I raised my hand. You can tell them you'll keep them safe, I said. You should never tell them that, Dawn said. It's a promise you can't keep. Mm-hmm. And I think about, it just makes me think about all these illusions and these fake and false safeties I'm trying to build around my kids all the time. And especially the pandemic maybe accelerated or emphasized some of those feelings. Like, don't worry, guys, it's all going to be okay, when I have no idea if things are going to be okay or not. Like for the first couple of weeks, I'm like, are we just going to be dragging our loved ones to the curb and just hiding inside? I have no idea. And meanwhile, I'm like, you guys just keep streaming your shows. It's fine. Like, don't worry. Like, tell me about that line, because it really stopped me, and I underlined it and I wrote it down, that you should never tell them that, Dawn said. It's a promise you can't keep. I feel like I was you. Like, you can tell your kids you'll keep them safe. Mm-hmm. But obviously you can't. That was brutal.
That was a brutal moment. She was right. She was right. That's the heartache of the foster care system, which is the heartache of parenting, overall, which you talked about climate change. Like, you're bringing human beings into this planet where we don't take care of one another and we don't take care of the earth. And so how do you parent then? How do you parent in adversity? How do you parent when your child is sick? I happen to have a really good friend, the writer Emily Rapp Black. That's a nonfiction writer I love. I'll say her, Emily Rapp Black. And her child died when before he turned 3. He had Tay-Sachs. And her question was like, how do you parent when there's no future? What does it look like? And we can't keep them safe, but we can love them. We can give them, self-efficacy. We can give them the sense that the world is made and can be unmade and remade, and that we have agency to exercise. That lesson was the lesson of foster care, which is not only did I fall in madly in love with this child that didn't belong to me, that wasn't mine, but I also had to hand her back to a universe that may or may not keep her safe. And that's, I think, what all parenting is. These beings that we love are never ours to keep. That's true of every mortal we choose to love. Everyone is going to die. And so I think literature like yours offers us that same question. How do you live in the world as it is? How do you live when everyone and everything is going to die? What does that look like? And I think the only answer is love.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because I wanted to stop you when you said, this world where people aren't taking care of the planet and people don't care about each other, because there are so many people who are trying their best to do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In your work and with Coco, you're bringing extra love into the world, and that's got to mean something. It's got to improve her outcome, if you want to use that kind of language. It's got to improve her life, even if it's all embedded in her subconscious and doesn't emerge until she's an adult. Something about bringing loving somebody has to be good every time.
Yeah, that's right. It's never wasted. I had a friend who told me she needs your full on in loveness. It's never wasted. And now that we have an infant in our house, and I've been reading more about what happens in those early months. People used to say that to me to try to make me feel better. Oh, you gave her a good first year. It's in her cells, and I wanted to be like, screw you. That doesn't help me in my grief. Actually, she's still gone. It felt like it had this undercurrent of she was never yours. You always knew she was going to leave. But, we gave her brain the ability to attach, and we see her now, and she's giggly and happy and connected to the people who are taking care of her. We did that for her. We gave her brain the knowledge that she was in a safe space, that her needs would be met, and that it was okay to love other people. That is something profound that can't be taken away.
Absolutely. Yeah, no doubt. One of the other things that I learned along the way is how other people automatically make assumptions when you're carrying a baby into the dry cleaner, when you're carrying a baby through the grocery store. This is a little bit of a longer passage, but I hope it's useful for fools like me before you read this book who ask things like, do you have kids? So this is pretty early in the book. Sarah wrote, do you have kids? Strangers asked almost every day. No, I said, not wanting to explain. Because really, it's an unimaginative question full of their beliefs about what family means, about who counts as kin. And it's a hard question for anything with a complicated relationship to family making. For those of us who've experienced miscarriage or failed adoptions or the death of a child, for those of us estranged or embattled or in grief, it's a question I now refuse to ask. Tell me about your family, I say instead, because I know belonging comes in all shapes and sizes, visible and invisible, hidden and made, and chosen and found. Can you talk just a little bit about what it was like day after day dealing with people automatically assuming Coco was your daughter and having to, it's a little bit like I hear people involved in the movement for Black Lives say, like, it's so exhausting having to educate people all the time. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about that? Did you feel some of that exhaustion?
I didn't feel exhausted, I'm sure, in the way that I'm sure Black Lives Matter activists are like, come on, white people, like, get it together. But I did feel, I felt like a sense of otherness, of not belonging or being different. That question that people always ask, do you have kids, really used to bother me because I wasn't sure how to answer it. And now we have a son, and people say, is this your first? Also an annoying question. Like, I have to tell you a lot to answer that question accurately. And then I'll say, no, it's not my first. We were a foster parent. And they'll say, oh, but this is your first biological? And I have to say again, no, he's adopted. So it just kind of is these moments where what we're trained to casually think of as what counts as family reveals itself. Actually, when people would ask me, strangers, how old's your daughter? And I would say, she's my foster daughter. More often than not, in this tiny town, people had experience as foster parents. One of the grocery store checkers, she had been raised in foster care. This woman who works at the children's clothing store here, she had been raised in foster care. So at first, these moments that could be alienating or create distance actually created community and connection in these very profound ways. I felt very held by this small town community. everyone loved Coco. Everyone knew what was happening. And it was, they carried our grief. You know, I think grief is something we carry in community, and this community has helped us carry ours.
Yeah, that's beautiful. The grocery checkout person said to you, it's the homes, the good homes that matter the most.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a real gift, you know, as you get your groceries with Coco.
Yeah. Yeah.
So many readers are always surprised to know that we finish books like long before they come out, and then you have time. Did you have time to get anything new off the ground, and what are you working on now?
Right now I'm working on an infant and working on sleeping. And then I'm working on I'm writing a novel. I don't know how to do it. Can you help me? I'm trying to write a novel. Can you please give me your top 10 tips?
Oh my gosh, you have to relearn everything every time, so I don't know anything.
Okay.
That's cool. That's fun. Have you written short stories before? Or
I actually wrote Draw Your Weapons as a novel first. It's nonfiction, but I wrote it as a novel and then had a friend tell me it was not working. And so I rewrote it as nonfiction because it was a true story anyway. I've written one short story that is not any good. So I'm playing around to see if I can do it. I'm learning. It's hard to make up a world. It's easier to write about stuff that's actually happening. And then I might be working on some like creativity kind of thing. I'm not sure. I'm playing around to see what happens.
Yeah, that's good. And it's really admirable to keep pushing yourself to grow, trying new things. As we get older, I'm finding is like, oh boy, I have to go learn this, but it's so invigorating. And just like you're saying, it building community when you try new activities in your town with other people. Now that the pandemic's starting to relent, it feels so good and healthy. And I hope you continue to do it. I hope I can continue to
Thank
do
you.
it.
I'm so excited for your new book, which I pre-ordered today. So I'm thrilled about it.
Yeah, it's very weird, Sarah.
Yes.
Well, for the folks out there, there are so many cool, interesting Idaho writers right now, and so fun that Sarah's new book is out. And I just so grateful to Book Passage for giving Sarah a time to share it with you guys. And congratulations, Sarah. It's just really a beautiful thing, and so proud of you. And I hope a lot of people not only get moved by it, but also maybe get inspired to learn more about the foster care system. And as you suggested a half hour ago, maybe even participate in it a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much for being in conversation with me. I love your mind, and it was a real gift to have it turned towards my work. And I will send a list of writers that I love. The novels that I've read recently that I really love, I read Autumn by Ali Smith. I think it's amazing. I read No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. Love that book. It's so weird.
That's like the Twitter book, right?
Yes. But read it. It takes a turn. It's devastating and gorgeous, and it reads like memoir. I read Brood by Jackie Polzin. Also reads like memoir, but it's a novel.
The Boise State MFA program. There's more Idaho connection.
It's so good. And I read Women Talking by Miriam. How do you say her last name? Toewes.
Yeah, she's a Canadian.
Amazing.
Phenomenal. She's super funny too. She's so funny. I read her previous book, not that one, but I can't remember. But I remember laughing out loud. It's actually she's brilliant.
Yeah, amazing. So I had to give some buy all those books from Book Passage because they're really good. Since I can't remember any nonfiction writers.
Wait, but the Lockwood book, you don't have to be like with Trump and Twitter. I just kind of was like Twitter. I'm not interested in, so that's why I never picked up that book. But it's more than Twitter. No,
it's actually about, she calls it the portal, and then it takes this really devastating turn. It's amazing. She's brilliant. She's a brilliant writer. Read it. Wow. It's good. It's short.
Thank you both so much. This was absolutely amazing. And what I loved about it was I feel like this conversation and Sarah, your book, it expands our world and our understanding of ourselves in our world. I mean, it takes something that we think we know and shows us how much bigger it is. It's, the closet in Narnia there, what really is family and kinship. And I love, there's so many phrases. I took notes throughout the whole thing. I'm such a nerd, but the kinship as a practice that you were talking about, mothering as a verb, which I love. And there was two things that you both said in different ways that really resonated. One was when Sarah said that the part of the other that scares you is God. And you were pointing out, and then Tony, you said, let's see here, pay attention to that what scares you, makes you uncomfortable. And recently, a bunch of booksellers and editors got together, and we were talking about diversity and making sure representation, what we can do to help our community through book selling. And they said, lean into what scares you. You know, lean into those books that make you uncomfortable. And I feel like you both talk about that and how this book really is about expanding your world of love by leaning into what scares you and the community that comes up around you, because it's there. But often our fear keeps us sort of isolated and siloed. I mean, I just thought your conversation was so good. Thank you so much.
Thanks
Really,
so much,
both
Lisa.
of you.
And just for me, I'm definitely failing every day to lean into the uncomfortable. Like, I got a long way to go. Being a white male, I'm like, I thought I got a lot to learn. So I'm working on it.
All do. We all do. And reading books like this is how we do it. I mean, expanding. And Tony, your book that's coming out, talk about expanding our world.
Thanks,
But
Lisa.
Stranger Care, wow. Just wow. And you know, as a parent that struggles, it's, you know, it's great to hear somebody talking about what love and mothering is, really. So thank you so much for that.
And thank you for bringing books to us. When my friends realized Coco was gonna leave, they built her a children's library, a children's book library. They thought if she couldn't have us as forever parents, she could have these stories that would light her way. And I hope that Stranger Care is this book that lights people's way, because it's been books that have lit the way for me. You know, it's how we practice being uncomfortable and experiencing otherness and love and beauty, all of it together. So thank you for supporting writers and books, Louisa. I really appreciate it.
We love it. Somebody said recently that recommending books is a love language. You know, it's how we show love. And so think about that every day. And this is definitely one we're going to be recommending to everybody that comes to Book Passage. So thank you so much. Thank you, everybody that could be here tonight. Again, there's a link for Stranger Care in the chat. And we do have those signed book plates. This is really such a special gift. So I hope that you will grab one yourself. Come into the store if you can. Look at that beautiful cover.
Yeah, it is beautiful.
And thank you so much for spending your time with us, all of you tonight. Thank you. Good night.